We were up by 7 a.m. on the morning of March 15th with an overcast and misty sky and just about due east of Cape Horn. The Chilean pilot had left the ship as we left the Beagle Channel around bedtime the night before. We were on our way to Elephant Island at the northern end of the Antarctic Peninsula, with 2 days to cross the Drake Passage, sometimes the roughest seas in the world. So far, we were lucky. The Drake was a lake. The sky cleared and we enjoyed fair winds and following seas the entire day. We may have been far from land, but we weren't at a loss for things to do. First of all, we had a ship to explore. The Hondius was built in 2019 as a Polar Class 6 vessel, meaning it is designed for summer and autumn operation in medium first-year ice. Polar Class 1 is designed for year-round operation in all polar waters. Class 7 is rated similar to Class 6, except it's limited to very thin ice. Currently, there are no Class 1 vessels in operation, and only one Class 2, a French expedition cruise ship taking up to 270 passengers to the North Pole. It's capable of breaking up to 2.5 meters, that's 8 feet, of ice. The U.S. Coast Guard has 2 Class 2 vessels on order. The first is expected to be in operation in 2025. The Canadians expect to have one in operation in 2029. The Hondius is 353 feet in length, with a beam of 50 feet, with 7 decks. Our cabin was on deck 3, right at the waterline. The boarding station for getting on and off the Zodiacs is also on deck 3. The bridge is on deck 7 and is mostly open to passengers, but occasionally we found it closed. Our passenger lounge is on deck 5, and the dining room is on deck 4. Deck 5 also has large open areas both aft and at the bow where passengers would often congregate to take in the view. Lifeboat stations are on deck 4. Besides exploring the Hondius, there was wildlife to look for. Our first view of a wandering albatross was a real thrill. With an 11-foot wingspan, the albatross is the largest flying bird in the world. It can fly for hours on end and sometimes days without flapping its wings. It has sensors in its nostrils telling it its wind speed. As the wind speed varies with height, it's much slower near the waterline than higher up, and it relies on the wind to keep it aloft. When it senses that it's going too slow, it will go into a dive, and by adjusting its wings, pick up speed, and then use that speed to rise higher, where it will continue gliding, all without a wing flap. We would be treated throughout the cruise to several lectures, sometimes 2 or 3 per day.
These are the Adelie, the chin strap and the gentoo, and I'll cover each one as we go along, okay? So they're obviously not the biggest penguins, they're not the giants like the
These
Everest
covered
or the Kings,
all
but
types
they're
of
still
topics,
pretty big.
from flying bird identification, penguins, whales, seals, and the strangest of all wildlife, birders. Not birds, but birders. This was a tongue-in-cheek talk that had us all laughing out loud. We had talks on explorers, on ice, on waves. There was no end to the lectures. We had 2 required lectures on that first day. The first was a safety talk on using the zodiacs, how to board, how to get off, both from the ship and from the shore, where and how to sit, and so on. The other required lecture concerned IATO, the International Association of Antarctic tour operators, of which Ocean Wide Expeditions is a member. There are numerous international regulations designed to protect Antarctica and the entire polar region, everything south of the 60th parallel. These regulations include everything from limiting all shipping south of 60 degrees to using a light grade of fuel oil, limiting shore parties to a certain number, generally less than 100, but on one occasion we were limited to 40, coordinating cruise itineraries with other tour operators to limit the number of operations in a given area at a given time, and even something as mundane as cleaning our boots. For biosecurity, to prevent the spread of any invasive organisms, our boots had to be cleaned immediately on re-entering the ship by walking through a disinfectant solution and scuffing our way through against brushes. Member tour operators pledge to uphold all treaty regulations and can be expelled for violations if necessary. We thoroughly enjoyed our first day of ocean cruising and finished with a delicious dinner. March 16th, another day of crossing the Drake Lake on our way to Elephant Island. Again, we were blessed with fair winds and following seas, although the sky remained overcast with periods of rain throughout the day. It was a good day to just relax, enjoy the ride, and watch for birds. As we were approaching Elephant Island, the time was right to hear an excellent talk by Kuhn on the Shackleton story. As the First World War was approaching in 1914, Ernest Shackleton was planning the first transcontinental trek across Antarctica, crossing the South Pole along the way. His ship, the Endurance, became icebound in the Weddell Sea, and in time began breaking up. He and his men dragged lifeboats loaded with supplies to Elephant Island, where he left the bulk of his crew and with just a few men braved the open winter sea to find help on South Georgia. They made it to South Georgia, but on the opposite side of the island from the sealing station. He and his exhausted men had to cross a mountain range to get there. No ships were available to send a rescue mission, but a transport to New Zealand was imminent. He sailed to New Zealand, but again, due to World War I, no rescue was possible. He did find a ship going to Argentina, where he was able to find help. As the rescue ship approached the beach on Elephant Island, he counted the men waving from shore. All but one were there. Then, from behind a rock, the last man appeared, shouting and waving. Everyone was saved. Kuhn, who told the story in much greater detail than I just did, like all the expedition guides, was a great speaker. Originally from Holland, he moved to Chile, where, when not working on expedition cruises to Antarctica in the winter, he guides mountain treks in the Andes. Most of our speakers were expedition guides, and many were research scientists from all over the world with specialized studies ranging from ice or ocean waves to whales. All were very good speakers who kept us enthralled. Every evening, Hans, our expedition leader, gave us a briefing discussing the day's events and what to expect tomorrow. We'd be arriving at Elephant Island overnight. Unfortunately, it didn't look like a zodiac landing would be possible. Maybe, if we were lucky, we'd get out in the boats and get close to shore, but there would be no landing. It was a disappointment, but this is Antarctica. Weather is king. Meanwhile, it had started to snow. There was no mistaking Elephant Island for the Emerald Isle this St. Patrick's Day morning. Green it was not. I can't think of a more desolate place to be marooned, while the boss was wandering the world searching for help. They never even knew if he was alive or dead. The Zodiacs stayed safely aboard the Hondius. We sailed off for Clarence Island, not too far away, to look for whales. We'd been over the continental shelf since yesterday afternoon, and the likelihood of seeing whales feeding on krill was high. We left Elephant Island behind us. The Clarence Island area is known for large concentrations of krill, and we were hoping to see a couple of dozen whales. As we were traveling, I took a walk upstairs to the bridge. Andrew from Wales, an expert birder on the expedition crew, was looking ahead with binoculars, watching for spouts with Hans. Oh my God, look at all those birds.
Yeah, we're talking thousands. Yeah, look with the binoculars over there. There's a huge feeding frenzy.
What do you see?
Feeding frenzy, so birds feeding next to the whales.
Okay.
There's a lot of whales there, and that's where the birds are, they're all circling above it.
I'll read from the ship's log. We now head east toward the whales. Shortly after, we are caught in a breathtaking spectacle. Everybody is now out on deck to take in this beauty, while countless ahs and ohs can be heard throughout the morning. We are gifted by dozens of fin whales close and far. Powerfully surfing in the high waves, they expose not only their dark, slender bodies and huge dorsal fin, quite often their snouts breaks through the wave's high crest, exposing their pointy, streamlined head with the creamy-colored right cheek. The phenomena of an aggregation of an estimated 200-plus fin whales lasts for hours, giving us enough time to get through the stage of being overwhelmed to focus on other animals, such as countless black-browed albatross, slender-billed prions, brown-colored giant petrels, and Wilson's storm petrels. On top of this, dozens of chinstrap and gentoo penguins aggregate in large groups or porpoise through the water surface, and to top it up, a fully white giant petrel flies around the bow. binoculars and cameras are lifted to look at this very rare morph. Much to our regret, it is time to leave to start our journey south toward the Antarctic Sound. Yet the spectacle continues as for several hours, fin whales could still be regularly seen along our course. The passengers and crew were shooting the spectacle with everything from cell phones to fancy long-lensed cameras, alongside a professional film crew making a documentary for German television.
Oh, really?
Be careful, we're changing course.
Oh,
Are we turning? Starboard?
yeah.
Oh, big blow.
6 blows right out
Yeah,
there.
6 blows right there.
Yes, you did.
Maybe we didn't get to land on Elephant Island. Maybe what we saw was more shades of gray than the Kelly green of the Emerald Isle. But this St. Patrick's Day, we truly had the luck of the Irish. Even Artur, our captain, and Hans, our expedition leader, had never seen a spectacle the likes of which we just experienced. Sherry and I have had, in our travels, numerous National Geographic moments. Bats at Carlsbad Caverns, bears in Alaska, wild horses in Wyoming. Today's National Geographic moment lasted for hours. We'd crossed the Drake Passage, and our first truly Antarctic experience was incredible. We cruised about 200 miles overnight and found ourselves on the morning of the 18th just off Devil Island at the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. Today we'd have our first Zodiac adventure. After our breakfast with a view, Sherry went to watch the expedition crew lower the Zodiacs. One was lowered by crane into the water with one driver aboard. He, or she, then drove over to the loading door and more drivers boarded. Then back to the stern, and as each Zodiac was lowered, a driver would hop in. When they were all ready, a few went to explore conditions at the landing area ashore. Then, passengers were loaded on, 8 per Zodiac. Since international treaties limit landing parties to 100 people or less, we, the passengers, were divided into 2 groups, the Reds and the Blues. Today, the Reds would land first. Then, the Blues would board the Zodiacs and cruise for a couple of hours while the Reds explored on shore. Then we would switch. When the time came for the next excursion, Blues would land first. We were Blue. The Reds went first. Look at me so I can see your face.
Yeah.
There's Sherry. Donna? Donna, turn around so I can see your face. Oh, there you are.
Right light.
guys all come from, but many of us nowadays live in busy cities, and I don't know if you've ever been to a place that only has 3 to 4 main sounds. It's incredible because all you hear is the splashing of the water, the cracking of the ice.
Hello!
Right now, yeah, you hear Elizabeth's engine. And Elizabeth.
Have you seen any icebergs?
No, there doesn't seem to be many
Not
around
me
here.
either.
At what point does it change from being called an ice floe to an iceberg?
It's about the size.
Yeah, and how big is it before it's is this an iceberg or an ice floe?
Yeah, there's like
Yeah,
there's like
it's
smaller
the
ones.
amount of, so it goes from like bergy bits, growlers, and then icebergs. So it depends on but it's how tall and how wide it is. So
Okay.
you can get, some of the ones out there are block icebergs. There's one that you'll see near the landing site that's called a dry dock iceberg. And then you have the dome iceberg. So that would be, if that one was slightly bigger, that would be a dome iceberg.
Okay,
But it has to do with the amount of meters. Yeah.
good. Thank you.
Yes.
The two peaks on the island, this one on the left and here on the right, gave the island its name, Devil Island. Someone with an imagination somewhat different than mine, or maybe they'd had an extra ration of grog, thought it looked like the horns on the devil. We cruised through the ice in flat calm. Then the breeze began to freshen. With the red team still ashore, we couldn't land. The ship radioed to the drivers. By no means return to the ship. In our protected area, we had 20 to 25 knot winds. The ship, just a short distance away, was getting gusts to 65. Eventually, some of the blues, including us, were allowed to land, but we had to stay on the beach for a short while.
Wave or something. The blue penguin.
Soon they started loading us up again. The wind had eased to the point where the zodiacs could, one at a time, return to the ship, but the ship could hold position only long enough to allow the passengers to have a minute and a half to all get off. Sherry was tossed into one zodiac while Donna and I had to wait for the next. Then we cruised around, trying, unsuccessfully, to stay in the lee of one iceberg after another. Years ago, my grandfather's brother Artie had a little joke. If we were out deer hunting and supposed to meet at a certain place in the woods at a certain time, he would say, "If I get there first, I'll make an X on a tree." The reply would be, "Well, if I get there first, I'll erase it." I guess Uncle Artie got here first. Eventually, we were all aboard the Hondius, and we moved on to Dreadnought Point for another outing that afternoon. Soaked to the skin, Sherry and Donna stayed aboard, but I wasn't going to miss a thing. But that will have to wait for episode 5.